She was 19, wearing her dead father's oversized field jacket, walking into a sterile warehouse reeking of bleach and anxious sweat. It was an auction for broken things, retired military dogs. When she finally spoke his name, 30 traumatized shepherds didn't bark. They just stopped breathing. The industrial park sat on the edge of San Diego, a sprawling grid of corrugated metal and cracked asphalt where the city dumped its unwanted commerce. The sky was the color of a bruised knee hanging low and heavy over the warehouse. Harper killed the engine of her rusted Jeep, her hands lingering on the steering wheel. Her knuckles were white. She took a breath, holding it in her lungs until the stale air burned, then let it out in a slow, ragged exhale. She checked her pocket for the third time. The cashier's check was still there, folded neatly next to her father's tarnished dog tags. 2 years ago, Jack Miller had come home in a flag-draped box, a casualty of a dusty road in a country most Americans couldn't point to on a map. He had been a Navy SEAL, a quiet man who spoke in brief, measured sentences, and showed affection through action rather than words. The military had handed Harper a folded flag, a shadow box of metal she didn't care about, and a polite, rehearsed apology. They hadn't given her the one thing Jack had loved almost as much as her: his dog. For 24 months, Harper had been told the dog was dead. Killed in action, they said. Collateral damage. But 3 weeks ago, a late-night phone call from one of Jack's old squad mates had unraveled that lie. The dog hadn't died. He had been severely injured, patched up, and quietly shuffled into the labyrinthine system of private defense contractors. Now, deemed too broken for service and too volatile for standard adoption, he was being liquidated, sold off to the highest bidder like a piece of surplus artillery. Harper pushed the Jeep's door open. The wind whipped her loose hair across her face, stinging her cheeks. She pulled her father's faded, olive-drab field jacket tighter around her shoulders. It still smelled faintly of gun oil and old cedar. A ghost she wore like armor. She walked toward Warehouse 4. There was no grand entrance, just a heavy steel roll-up door propped open about 10 feet, spilling harsh, fluorescent white light out onto the loading dock. The noise hit her before she even crossed the threshold. It was a chaotic, guttural wall of sound. Barking, whining, the relentless rhythmic rattle of chain-link fences being paced and head-butted. Underneath the noise was the smell. Industrial floor cleaner, wet fur, old blood, and the unmistakable, sharp scent of canine panic. Inside, the vast concrete floor was lined with rows of temporary wire kennels. The lighting buzzed angrily overhead, casting sterile, shadowless glare over everything. Harper stood near the entrance, her hands shoved deep into her jacket pockets, observing the crowd. It was exactly the kind of crowd she expected, and exactly the kind of crowd she despised. There were about 50 people milled around the staging area. A few were well-meaning but naive civilians looking for a hero dog to post on their social media. But most were opportunists. Security firm reps in identical tactical pants and wraparound sunglasses, sipping bad coffee from styrofoam cups. Men with thick necks and tight polo shirts, looking to buy cheap, highly trained attack dogs to guard junkyards or sketchy compounds. They walked up and down the aisles, pointing at the cages, reading the clipboards hung on the wire as if they were looking at the mileage on a used truck. Harper felt a cold knot of disgust tighten in her stomach. These were the things that had kept these men safe while they slept in their beds. And now they were being picked over for pennies on the dollar. She began to walk the aisles. The dogs were a mix of breeds, mostly Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds. They were magnificent, ruined creatures. Some paced their small cages with manic, unbroken energy, their paws raw from turning tight circles on the concrete. Others lay completely flat, their eyes vacant and unblinking, having retreated to a place far away from the noise and the harsh lights. Harper saw dogs missing parts of their ears, dogs with long, hairless scars slicing across their flanks, dogs that flinched violently every time a clipboard clattered against the wire. She checked the numbers on the clipboards. Lot 12, Lot 18, Lot 25. The squad mate hadn't known the lot number. He hadn't even known the dog's exact designation number off the top of his head. All Harper knew was the dog's breed, a massive black and tan German Shepherd, and a specific jagged scar that ran from his left shoulder down to his elbow, courtesy of shrapnel from an earlier deployment. Harper stopped in front of a cage holding a young Malinois. The dog was trembling violently, its teeth chattering. A man in a suit stood next to Harper, tapping the cage with his pen. "Too nervous," the man muttered to his associate. "Gun-shy, useless." "He's not a broken toaster," Harper snapped, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. She didn't look at the man, keeping her eyes on the trembling dog. "He's terrified. Stop tapping the glass." The man scoffed, looking Harper up and down, taking in her combat boots and the oversized jacket. He smirked, dismissing her entirely, and walked away. Harper unclenched her jaw. Getting kicked out for starting a fight wouldn't help her dad. She had to stay focused. A loud screech of microphone feedback echoed through the warehouse, silencing a few of the dogs momentarily. At the far end of the room, a man climbed onto a wooden pallet serving as a makeshift auction block. He was wearing a cheap sports coat and held a clipboard. "All right, folks, let's get this moving," the auctioneer's voice boomed over the cheap PA system. "We've got 42 assets to clear out today. Terms are cash or certified check. As is, where is. No returns, no liabilities. Let's bring up lot number 1. Harper moved closer, blending into the back of the crowd. Her heart began a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She slipped her hand into her pocket, her fingers tracing the cold metal of Jack's dog tags. "I'm here, Dad," she thought, the cynical shell she wore cracking just a fraction. "I'm going to find him." The auction moved with a sickening, methodical efficiency. The auctioneer, a man named Davis, whose voice had the flat, rapid-fire cadence of a carnival barker, processed the dogs with ruthless speed. Lot 4, 3-year-old Malinois, former explosive detection, washed out due to joint degradation. Opening bid 500. Do I hear 500? 500 to the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 6? A dog would be dragged out by a handler wearing thick, bite-proof sleeves. The dog would either pull wildly at the heavy leather leash or plant its feet and refuse to move, terrified of the open space and the sea of unfamiliar faces. Hands would shoot up. Money would change hands. The dog would be dragged off to a waiting crate in the back of someone's pickup truck. Harper watched a young, vibrant shepherd go to a man who looked like he ran a scrap metal yard, sold for a meager $800. The dog had a Purple Heart insignia stamped on its paperwork. By the time they reached the 30s, the crowd had thinned. The prime assets, the dogs that still had some workable years left in them, were gone. What remained were the heavily traumatized, the deeply injured, the liabilities. The air in the warehouse seemed to grow heavier. the barking replaced by a low, collective hum of exhaustion from the remaining cages. Harper's throat was dry. She had scanned almost every cage, but hadn't found him. A terrifying thought began to creep into the back of her mind. What if the intel was wrong? What if he died in transit? What if someone already bought him? She gripped the edge of a metal folding table near the back, her knuckles aching. "All right, moving on," Davis said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. "Lot 40. Let's bring him out. Careful with this one, boys." Harper looked up. Two handlers emerged from the back hallway, their boots scuffing against the concrete. Between them, on two heavy lead lines pulled taut in a V shape, was a massive German shepherd. The crowd instinctively took a half step back. He was huge, easily pushing 90 pounds, but his frame was hollowed out, his ribs showing faintly through his dull, matted coat. He was entirely black, except for deep, rusted tan markings on his legs and chest. He wore a heavy leather muzzle that looked like a cage, but it was his posture that silenced the room. He wasn't cowering and he wasn't pulling. He stood with a stiff, rigid stillness, his head lowered, his ears pinned flat against his skull. His eyes were a pale, deadened amber, scanning the crowd not with fear, but with a cold, hollow hostility. Harper's breath hitched. As the dog shifted his weight to his right side, the harsh overhead light caught the left shoulder. There it was, a thick, hairless scar, jagged and white, tracing down his front leg. "This here is Lot 40, Davis read from his clipboard, his voice losing a bit of its salesmanship. 8 years old, dual-purpose patrol and apprehension, multiple deployments. Davis paused, clearing his throat. Notes here say he's difficult. Handler was KIA 2 years ago. Asset has been bouncing around, holding facilities since. Severe PTSD, highly reactive. Frankly, folks, he's a liability. We're starting the bidding at $200. Strictly guard dog potential here, and you'll need a reinforced enclosure. $200. Harper felt the blood rush to her ears. They were selling a veteran who had bled for his country for less than the cost of a new television. "Do I hear 200? Davis asked, looking around. The crowd was silent. The security firm guys shook their heads. The junkyard owners looked at the dog's rigid, aggressive posture and decided he was too much trouble. The dog let out a low, vibrating growl that didn't sound like it came from his throat, but from deep within his chest. It sounded like an engine turning over. One of the handlers cursed and yanked the lead line, causing the dog to stumble on his bad leg. "Hey, easy with him," Harper shouted, her voice echoing off the corrugated roof. Heads turned. The handlers glared at her. Davis squinted past the lights. "You bidding, miss, or just offering unsolicited advice?" Harper shoved her way through the front row of men. She stepped out into the clearing in front of the auction block. The two handlers tightened their grip on the lead lines. The dog didn't look at her. His amber eyes remained locked on the handler who had yanked his neck. "I'll give you 500, a voice called out from the side. It was a man with a thick beard wearing a leather vest. "He'll look good chained to the front gate of my shop." Harper whipped her head around to look at the man, her eyes blazing. Then she turned back to Davis. 1,000. Davis raised an eyebrow. "I have 1,000. Do I hear 1,100? 12, the biker grunted. 2,000, Harper said instantly, not breaking eye contact with Davis. She didn't have 2,000. Her cashier's check was for 1,500. She didn't care. She would sell the Jeep. She would walk home. The biker scoffed, waving a hand in dismissal. Too rich for my blood for a broken mutt. Have at him, kid. 2,000 going once, Davis said rapidly. Going twice. Sold. He banged his pen against the clipboard. Lot 40 to the girl in the oversized coat. Good luck getting him in your car, sweetheart. Harper didn't acknowledge the insult. She didn't move toward the payment table. She slowly turned her body toward the dog. The handlers were already pulling him back toward the holding area, eager to be rid of him. The dog planted his front paws, refusing to be dragged, his claws clicking frantically against the smooth concrete. He let out another deep, rattling growl, thrashing his head against the heavy muzzle. The noise in the warehouse had picked up again. Other dogs barking, people talking. The chaotic background radiation of the auction. Harper took a step forward. "Wait," she said to the handlers. "Lady, you need to stay back," the taller handler warned, bracing his weight against the leash. "He's not friendly. You need to pull your truck around back, and we'll load him in a crate." Harper ignored him. She took another step. She was now 10 feet from the massive shepherd. The dog suddenly stopped thrashing. He snapped his head toward her. His pale amber eyes locked onto hers. Through the leather straps of the muzzle, he bared his teeth. He didn't know her. She was just another stranger in a room full of threats. The ambient noise in the warehouse seemed to roar in Harper's ears. The barking of 30 other dogs, the scraping of boots, the humming lights. She needed to cut through it. She needed him to know. Harper stopped. She stood perfectly still, letting her arms fall to her sides. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the stale, bleach-scented air. "Hey," she said, her voice completely steady, barely above a conversational volume, yet it seemed to carry. She looked directly into the dog's hostile, broken eyes. "Stand down! For Jack." The reaction wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't magic. It was chemistry and conditioning, a phantom limb of memory flaring up in the dog's fractured mind. At the word Jack, the massive shepherd stopped pulling. His front paws, claws dug deep into the concrete, relaxed their grip just a fraction. The low, rattling growl dying in his throat sounded like an engine running out of gas. He stood absolutely paralyzed, his amber eyes locked onto Harper, the hostility fracturing into something infinitely more dangerous. Confusion. But it wasn't just him. The command tone Harper had used, a sharp, flat, gut-level register she had spent 2 years unconsciously mimicking from her father, bounced off the corrugated steel walls. It was the universal cadence of a handler on a live wire. The other dogs heard it. They were animals bred and broken for war, hardwired to snap to attention at that exact frequency. A Malinois in the front row dropped into a sit. A scarred shepherd 2 cages down stopped pacing and turned toward the center aisle. One by one, the chaotic barking sputtered and died out. Within 10 seconds, the warehouse fell into a profound, suffocating silence, leaving only the hum of the overhead fluorescent tubes. The crowd of buyers shifted uneasily. The sudden quiet was infinitely more unsettling than the noise. The 2 handlers holding the lead lines exchanged a nervous glance. The taller one relaxed his grip slightly, wiping a bead of sweat from his cheek against his shoulder. "Lady, I don't know what kind of trick that is, but back away. Now." Harper didn't blink. She kept her eyes locked on the dog. She took another step forward. She was in his strike zone now. If he lunged, the handlers wouldn't be able to pull him back in time. The dog's ears twitched. He leaned his head forward, straining against the heavy leather muzzle, his nostrils flaring wide. He was pulling in the air, dissecting the scent profile of the girl standing in front of him. Bleach, stale coffee, nervous human sweat. But underneath that, woven into the fabric of the oversized, faded, olive-drab jacket she wore, was something else. Old gun oil, dried cedar, and the faint, deeply ingrained ghost of the man who used to sleep next to his crate in a plywood hooch in Fallujah. The dog let out a sound Harper had never heard an animal make. It was a sharp, inhaled whistle, followed by a low, tremulous whine that vibrated through his entire rib cage. The rigid tension in his spine collapsed. His back bowed, his heavy tail dropping between his legs, sweeping the concrete. He took one halting, agonizing step toward her, dragging his bad left shoulder. "Dutch," Harper whispered, remembering the name scrawled on the back of a faded photograph she'd found in her dad's footlocker. Dutch dropped his massive head, pressing his muzzle hard into Harper's sternum, right against the brass zipper of Jack's jacket. He exhaled, a long, ragged breath that seemed to deflate his entire body. Harper slowly raised her hands. Her fingers were trembling. She laid one palm flat between his ears, feeling the thick, coarse fur and the heat radiating off his skull. Her other hand traced down his neck, stopping just short of the jagged white scar on his shoulder. Dutch leaned his 90-pound weight against her legs, letting out another desperate whine. He wasn't a liability. He wasn't a weapon. He was a grief-stricken soldier who had finally found the scent of home. The silence in the warehouse broke. The auctioneer, Davis, cleared his throat loudly, tapping his pen against his clipboard. "Fascinating display, miss, really. But a bid is a binding contract. You owe the house $2,000. Harper kept one hand on Dutch's neck and turned her head to look at the podium. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold reality. She reached into her jeans pocket and pulled out the folded cashier's check. She walked over to the folding table, Dutch sticking to her left side like a shadow, his leash going slack in the handler's hands. They didn't try to stop him. She flattened the check onto the table and slid it toward Davis. Davis looked at the piece of paper, then back up at her. "This is for $1,500. "It's what I have," Harper said flatly. "You bid $2,000. The terms are cash or certified check for the full amount. If you can't pay, the asset goes back on the block." Davis sighed, looking exhausted. "I don't make the rules. It's a business." Harper unclenched her jaw. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She reached toward her neck and unclasped the silver chain she wore. The two tarnished dog tags clinked together. She laid them on the table next to the check. "Jack Miller," Harper said, her voice dropping all pretense. "Chief Petty Officer. He died 2 years ago. That dog took shrapnel pulling him out of a collapsing compound. They told me he was dead, too." She stared into Davis's eyes, refusing to let him look away. "I have $1,500, and I have the tags of the man who trained him, the man who bled out while that dog guarded his body." Harper leaned forward, planting her hands on the edge of the metal table. "You are going to take this check. You are going to give me his medical files, and I am going to walk out of here with my father's dog. Or we can see how many of these buyers stick around when I start calling the local news affiliates about stolen military property." Davis looked at the check. He looked at the tarnished silver tags. Then he looked past Harper's shoulder. Dutch was standing completely still, his pale amber eyes fixed dead on the auctioneer. He wasn't growling, but his posture had shifted back to the rigid, coiled tension of a loaded spring. He was guarding her. Davis swallowed hard. He reached out, picked up the dog tags, and slid them back across the table toward Harper. He grabbed the cashier's check and folded it into his breast pocket. "Handler, unclip your leads," Davis muttered over the microphone. He tossed a manila folder onto the table. "Lot 40 is sold. Clear the aisle. Get him out of here before he bites someone." The air outside the warehouse hit Harper like a physical blow. It tasted of diesel exhaust, hot asphalt, and the briny dampness rolling in off the distant San Diego harbor. She walked across the cracked parking lot, the heavy leather lead line wrapped twice around her right hand. The leather dug into her palm, a solid, grounding tether. Dutch walked precisely at her left heel. He didn't pull ahead. He didn't lag. He didn't spare a single glance for the security contractors slamming tailgates or the junkyard owners revving their trucks. His focus was entirely on the rhythmic sway of the oversized olive-drab jacket Harper wore. His claws clicked a heavy, uneven cadence against the pavement, a stark reminder of the ruined shoulder he favored with every step. They reached her rusted Jeep Cherokee. Harper pulled the keys from her pocket, her fingers stiff, and popped the rear hatch. The gas struts groaned, pushing the door upward to reveal the worn cargo space. "Up," she said, tapping the edge of the bumper. Dutch stopped. He looked at the bumper, then down at his left leg. He shifted his weight back, preparing to launch, but a sharp tremor ran down his flank, and he aborted the movement. The shrapnel wound had permanently altered his joint mechanics. Jumping blindly into a confined metal box was a risk his battered body refused to take. He let out a sharp, frustrated breath through his nose, his ears pinning back in agitation. Harper didn't push him, nor did she repeat the command. She stepped in close, smelling the intense, sour musk of kennel stress radiating off his coat. She slid her left arm under his heavy barrel chest, locking her right arm securely behind his hind legs. "I got you," she muttered. "On 3. She braced her boots against the asphalt and hoisted. 90 pounds of dense muscle and dead weight strained her lower back, but she locked her knees, lifting him smoothly over the lip of the bumper. Dutch scrambled for a second, his claws tearing at the rubber floor matting before he found his footing. He didn't circle. He immediately dropped into the far corner, tucking his muzzle tight under his tail. Harper slammed the hatch shut and climbed into the driver's seat. She turned the ignition. The engine choked twice before roaring to life with a familiar uneven idle. She shoved the gear shift into drive and pulled out of the industrial park. She took the highway east, leaving the gray, suffocating sprawl of the city behind, aiming for the arid, rolling foothills of the high desert. The sky began to clear as they climbed in elevation, the bruised cloud cover breaking apart to let sharp, brilliant shafts of late afternoon sun bleed across the cracked dashboard. Harper drove in total silence. The radio remained off. The only sounds were the rush of wind through the cracked windows and the heavy, rhythmic panting coming from the back. She checked the rearview mirror obsessively. Dutch lay perfectly still, his eyes wide open, tracking the blur of telephone poles whipping past the glass. On the passenger seat lay the manila folder Davis had thrown at her. At a red light, she flipped it open. The pages were a clinical autopsy of a living creature. Asset 84 Bravo. Severe joint degradation. Highly reactive to loud noises. Handler KIA. Unpredictable bite history. Recommend euthanasia. She slammed the folder shut, her jaw aching from how hard she was clenching her teeth. She pressed the accelerator, putting more miles between the dog and the people who wrote those words. When the smooth pavement finally gave way to a deeply rutted dirt road near her property line, Harper pulled the Jeep onto the shoulder. The tires crunched loudly against the dry gravel. She killed the engine. It ticked softly as it cooled in the fading heat. Outside, the wind brushed through the brittle sagebrush. Harper unbuckled her seatbelt. She didn't open the door. Instead, she climbed awkwardly over the center console, squeezing between the front seats into the rear cargo area. Dutch flinched violently as her shadow fell over him. He pulled his head back, pressing his spine hard against the side panel of the Jeep. His ears flattened against his skull. Harper ignored the instinct to back away. She sat cross-legged on the rubber mat, barely a foot from his chest. She didn't reach for him. She didn't speak. She just sat there, breathing slowly, letting him absorb the reality of the quiet vehicle, the fresh desert air, and the smell of dry earth. 10 minutes ticked by. The sun dipped below the ridgeline, filling the Jeep with cool blue shadows. Slowly, the rigid tension in Dutch's neck began to melt. He army-crawled forward, dragging his belly against the floor, until his heavy head rested completely on Harper's crossed ankle. He looked up. The hostile amber glare was gone, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it looked agonizing. Harper reached down. Her fingers traced the thick, stiff leather straps of the cage muzzle, finding the heavy metal buckle securely fastened behind his ears. The file said unpredictable bite history. She didn't care. She unclasped the metal prong and slid the leather straps free. Dutch didn't snap. He didn't bare his teeth. He let out a massive, shuddering exhale, shaking his head violently side to side to cast off the phantom weight. He pushed his wet nose into her open palm, his rough tongue dragging across her skin once. Then, he pressed his face deep into the center of Jack's field jacket, right over her heart, and closed his eyes. Harper wrapped both arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his coarse fur. The cynical armor she had worn every single day since the officers knocked on her door shattered. The tears came hot, fast, and silent, soaking into his coat. She wept for the father who never came back, and Dutch let out a low, vibrating groan, leaning his entire weight against her. He was home. Not all casualties of war come home in boxes. Some come back with 4 legs, invisible scars, and a fierce, unbroken loyalty to the ghosts they left behind. If this story of Harper and Dutch reminded you that the deepest wounds often require the quietest kind of healing, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who knows that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays when the fighting stops. Subscribe to the channel for more raw, unfiltered stories. We'll see you in the next one.